And there we go. I believe we're on. Yes, yes. Hello. Good to see you. Good evening. Welcome aboard. And what is it? It's Sunday morning. It is Sunday morning early here in California, 1 o'clock. And wherever you are in the world, it is exactly the right time. Exactly the right time. Oh, we don't need the, no, we don't want the chat overlay on. Oh, and we're putting chat on the box. I don't know why that is. They just keep adding these interesting new things, but doesn't matter. Chat, yes. Captions, yes. It's all okay. Anyway, hi, good evening, good morning, good afternoon. I'm Tad. I'm going to be reading. Most of you here know that already. Probably almost all of you do. So let me know if there's, as always, I'm still messing with stuff here and still learning how this all works. I don't know why is Eurese's comment on here? I don't even see it in the side things. Anyway, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It's all good. It is all just what it's supposed to be in this best of all possible worlds. So anyway, good morning. Hello. Nice to see you. Been not too bad. A little bit of a busy week. We had some of our young ones away for a few days out scouting a possible place to move to and go to college in, which turned out, I think, fairly successfully, and it's looking likely that's what it's going to be, which is up in Northern California. So they will be, a long day's drive away, but not the other side of the planet or anything like that. So we're happy. It's an area that we like to, and we have friends and whatnot up there. So that's all good. They just got back tonight. That was very exciting. I'm working as usual. Had the tragic mistake. I was just thinking about how, okay, so I've pretty much got this all locked in and I can get back to working again now that I've done all the pages that I had to sign for the limited edition book. And as I was sitting there thinking about how I was all ready now to go ahead and start working on the book again, I had this sudden thought about one particular plot line, which I thought I had all figured out. And I suddenly went, well, what if I just totally flip-flop that? That might be better, actually. And, as soon as I did that, I went, oh my God, now I have to think through everything all over again. I'm probably avoiding work. That's probably what's happening. But it also is, you want to do it right. You want to make it the best possible. And when you've got all these combinations of characters that you can put together, you want to make sure every storyline and every character line are fulfilling their not just their role in the story, but I personally am a very strong believer that if you're going to have subsidiary characters, but you're going to view the world through them, which is my kind of kaleidoscopic method of telling big stories, then you owe those characters and the readers something. You've got to give those characters an arc of their own. They have to go all the way through the story once they've been introduced, and you have to find out what happens to them. And it has to have some kind of movement and change, just like the main plot lines do. It has to be, it doesn't have to directly affect what's going on in the story because, that would be, I don't know, in many cases that's kind of awkward. That's trying to make everything fit together. And that gets closer to like writing French theatrical farce or something like that, where every single pistol that's hanging on the wall in Act 1 has to be fired by the end of it. But I do believe very strongly that if you are going to use characters both as a way to tell the story and as a way to involve the readers in the story, then you owe it to the reader to see that all of those characters all the way through and see the resolution for them. For some of them, the resolution may not be nice. It may not be good. For others, it may be nice, but peripheral to the central plot. So it's not like every single storyline has to, as I said, doesn't have to feed right into the ending. But it definitely has to go till the end, more or less, or, till late in the story somehow. So I made the tragic mistake of thinking, well, what if I just flip flop this one? And it just opened up this almost literal can of worms in the sense of its squirminess and unpleasantness because I really didn't want to have to rethink about any of these things anymore. I thought I was all set. So I'm going to be pondering that for the rest of the weekend. And you can all send me your sympathy vibes, and I will appreciate them. I will definitely appreciate them. Anyway, now I've gone out of focus again. Here I am. There we go. Okay, sometimes if I move too quickly, the camera gets a little seasick and loses track of me. As I often say, not that there's any huge advantage to having me in perfect focus. Anyway, so before I, and in case I think of something else that I need to tell you about, which I don't think I do, I'm going to just move along and say hello to everybody here. I don't know why Erise's thing is still stuck on the screen there. I cannot figure that out. Um, who knows? Anyway, I don't think that's even from this time, but I'm not sure. Okay, anyway, whatever. It's all interesting and it's all fun. Hello, Rosalba. Good morning to you. And Mr. Chris, good morning to you and good morning to all. Ronnie, good morning. Holger sends a bleak hello from cold and dreary Val d'Isle. The only sunshine is the 1 hour with me and you guys. Aw, that's so nice. Greetings to the rest of the world, says Holger. Wouter says, good evening, Tad. Good morning to all. Alexis shows up to razz Alexis. Why are you doing that? Why is this hiding? I don't want it hidden. No, go away. That's silly. Why is that hiding? Show. Yes, show. Okay. Show. And show that. Why is that? No, I don't want that hidden. Okay. Oh, that's why. That's bizarre. Okay, it means show on screen. That's why it was doing that, I guess. Who knows? Anyway, so Wouter, hello, good to see you. Iris, you spent a long time on screen there, and that's where you were, and that's why I couldn't see you, because it hid you while it put you on the screen. That's totally bizarre. Alexis says, nerd, or nerd. It's funny, I actually said that to my young people tonight when they had just come back from their trip and they were talking about all the D&D, the cool D&D places around and the chances in this new town that they want to move to of finding Dungeons and Dragons buddies. And of course, me being me, I went, nerd. So beat you to it, Alexis. Sorry, but yes, I am a nerd too. Mark, good morning. Back from Iceland to sunny Yorkshire. Oh, I'm glad to hear it. That's nice. We were just watching an old time team set in West Yorkshire, in Castleford, tonight. So I was thinking about Yorkshire. And there, speaking of England, my England, there is my mother-in-law, Hazel. Good morning, sweetie. Love to you, love to the family. We miss ya. Ron, hello, Ron. Good to see ya. And Tadites. Or we have to think of it. I don't know. There seems like there should be Tadites. Sounds like a geological fixture of some kind. Like there are stalagmites and stalactites and Tadites or something like that. Anyway, anybody want to come up with another term? That's fine. Until then, we'll use Tadites, I guess. Kristen, hello, Kristen. Rad. That's good too. I'm happy to be rad. Although even now, there was a time when like rad was like actually current. I mean, I remember I was already a grown up. I was having, we were having our first kids when people were running around going, "That's rad, man." And before that, radical. That was very Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, so that must have been late 80s, I guess. Anyway, see, this is the funny thing about like aging is that things to you always seem like they're after your time, even when they're 30 years old. So music that to young people or younger people, seems like hopelessly old. Like music from the 90s, they're like, oh, that's so 90s, man. And to me, it's like, oh, yeah, that's that newfangled stuff that all the young people listen to. Not that I don't listen to it myself. I still listen to new music. I'm always finding cool new stuff that I like. But it's in my mind. In my mind, everything has a sort of before and after. And anything that happened after I was in my early 20s is definitely like, you'll find this out. Those of you who aren't old already, you'll find this out. There's a weird, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a weird effect. There's a weird effect that goes on where, there's like this line gets drawn, and everything that happens after a certain point is like later stuff, post importance in a sense, because it didn't happen during your formative years. And then when you suddenly realize that 30 years have gone by since those things that were already seemed post your important stuff. Anyway, it's interesting. Timothy, hello, good to see you. And hello and greetings to the Great White North, of course. Take off for the Great White North. A hoser. Was just watching. What was I just watching? Speaking of hosers. Oh, kids were watching an animated film which had Rick Moranis, and I only heard Rick Moranis, but I'm assuming the other one was Dave Thomas. They're playing mooses, or moose, plural, or meese. Anyway, and so it was a moment of deep fondness because, of course, again, speaking of formative periods, when everybody else was watching Saturday Night Live here in America, which was a very good show. I mean, there's no question. There's classic, wonderful stuff for Saturday Night Live. But my best friend and I at the time were watching SCTV, which is most of the people in it were Canadian. And we particularly liked it because it was more absurdist and it had more kind of complicated inner connections. I mean, you can imagine from the kind of books I write. I love stuff that has backstories and in jokes and all that kind of stuff. And SCTV was just full of stuff like that. So that was like my favorite comedy show. And I can still watch it and enjoy it. So anyway, so that's Great White North is a reference to two characters, Bob and Doug McKenzie, who were the McKenzie brothers, who were these two Canadian guys played by Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas, who were originally put into SCTV because the Canadian government, since they were making the show in Canada, the Canadian government said they had to have a certain amount of Canadian content. This is back in, must have been mid 1970s sometime. And so Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas came up with the like stupidest, most cliched Canadian thing. Them both being Canadian, they came up with the stupidest, most cliched Canadian thing that they could come up with, which was the McKenzie brothers. These two guys wearing wool hats, toques, and drinking beers and cooking back bacon and doing their thing, and they'd be talking, very Canadian, eh? And and they would like do topics on their show, eh? And they'd talk about, like, okay, well, like, how like when you chug a beer, eh? And then, and these were the kinds of topics they were, and it became a huge hit. It became the most well-known part of SCTV. In fact, there was some cast discontent. They got so much more well known. They even eventually had a movie made about them, and they had an album with a song that was played by Rush that actually did quite well on the charts called Take Off for the Great White North. And I know this is a long aside, but I'm going to finish it anyway. And so when they went to do their Playboy interview, which was another sign in those days of having made it big, not being a Playboy centerfold, but having the Playboy interview, which was usually with newsmakers of various kinds and important entertainers and stuff like that. So when Playboy did a thing on them, they actually shot all the rest of the cast and then shot Bob and Doug in their Bob and Doug, which was Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas, in their Bob and Doug Canadian hoser guy outfits. And kind of the rest of the cast felt like, so what? So now like we're the secondary cast, and these two characters that Rick and Dave came up with are now like the stars of the show. And it was a show full of wonderful, wonderful comedic people, many of whom are still working and doing brilliantly. I mean, Catherine O'Hara, who you've all seen in Beetlejuice and Schitt's Creek, and of course Eugene Levy, which did Schitt's Creek with her, and has been in tons of other things, American Pie movies and everything. And Rick Moranis and Dave Thomas. Rick Moranis later became very well known in things like Disney movies like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids and stuff, and the great John Candy and Joe Flaherty and a variety of other, you know, cast members, and eventually Martin Short. So it was a great show. It was a wonderful show. But for a while there, the Canadians, the Bob and Doug McKenzie were a bit controversial. Anyway, sorry for that long disquisition, but I never get a chance to talk about SCTV, and it was a wonderful, wonderful show. Just seeing John Candy, gigantic John Candy, playing Divine, another 70s icon, as Peter Pan. in the production at the Mellonville Art Dome of the Peter Pan, the play. And, and of course, the famous thing about the real play of Peter Pan is that they have to fly Peter Pan on wires. But of course, John Candy and Divine both weighed a lot. So they've got John dressed up as Divine, who is, of course, a transvestite, a huge, bizarre looking transvestite. Dressed up as Peter Pan. So it's John Candy playing Divine, playing Peter Pan, being hauled around on a giant rope doing "I'm flying." Oh God, it was wonderful. And of course, also never mind. See, if I get started on this, I'm going to go all night. Great show. Anyway, sorry. So Timothy, hi, good to see you. See, this is your fault, Timothy, because you said Great White North and it started me off. Ronnie. Hello, you'll be in Prague this time next week. Well, we reach Prague somehow on the internet, so you will be able to listen if you want to. Alexis, everything is different, she says. She says. I'm not quite sure why, but maybe the background, maybe because I'm wearing a pink shirt. I don't know. Ronnie says, Iris is special. Yes, well, clearly for a while, Iris was very special since she had command of the screen. A long day's drive away has different meanings in the U.S. and in the EU, says Chris. I know that. The first time when I moved to England, you saw my mother-in-law, Hazel, was here just a little while ago. The first time I moved to England and I proposed that we should drive up to Birmingham to go see Deb's family. Deb was like, drive to Birmingham? And I'm like, how long does it take? She's like, 2 hours. I was like, Jesus, we go to people's houses for dinner for 2 hours and drive home. I'm from California, girl. What are you talking about? Anyway, so yeah, we have much different idea about driving places than they did in the UK when I was living there. Wouter and Ilva. There's Ilva. Hello, Ilva. Good morning. The light is so noisy this morning. Oh, okay. I hear you. All right. Well, take it easy. Take it easy. I'll try not to shout. Mahmoud. Hello, hello. Good to see you. And who else we've got? They're discussing what time it is in various European countries. I'm glad you guys are putting the internet to use here. This is the greatest invention in the history of humankind, the most amazing way to share information. And here you're all going like, it's 9 o'clock where I live. It's 10 where I live. I hope you're proud of yourselves. Anamika, hello, good morning. Who else have we got here? Everybody's now talking about each other's hangovers. Christina, hello, good morning. And who else have we got? Sandra, hello, checking in from South Africa. I so apologize for my South African accent. It's one of the ones I've never tried to actually figure out. So I have no South African accent. So I'm kind of just faking my way through the parts where I have to do South African. So forgive me for that. If I had had more time and if I wasn't in the middle of so much work, I would actually put some effort into learning how to do a proper South African accent. So just try to ignore it. I'm actually okay with most accents, but South Africa, I'm shamefully unpracticed. Becky, hello. Good to see you. Oh, Christina also is talking about how things are in Berlin. Who else have we got here? Tadix. Yes, Tadix is also a good one. Jessica, hello. Good to see you. Cliff, good evening or good morning or whatever it is. Yes. Alexis says, somebody make me toast. Poof, you're toast. There's Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. Timothy, yes, Kids in the Hall was a great show too. And that A lot of people went on from that to do wonderful things as well. Absolutely. Strange Brew. Yes, Becky reminds me that Strange Brew was the name of the Bob and Doug McKenzie movie with Max von Sydow, of all people. The very fine, fine Swedish actor. Swedish? German. Anyway, can't remember. German, I think. Um, yeah, he was in a lot of Bergman's movies, so I always think he's Swedish. But then again, I think he was also did a lot of German television when he was a young actor, so he may have been German. Anybody else here that I haven't said hello to yet? All right, very good. Okay, so now I've said hello to everybody. I've wasted a lot of time, and as a result, now I can start reading. So you may remember when we last were reading, we had Rini and Kabu getting prepared to use the tanks, the V tanks as they're called in the Air Force, the old South African Air Force place underneath the mountain in the Drakensberg Mountains. And then after they tested out the machinery, Kabu showed Rini his first iteration of his recreation of the Kalahari from the Bushman point of view. And he danced, and then Rini danced with him. And now we've gone back with Paul Jonas. Paul Jonas, if you remember, is on a very strange version of Mars. It's very much kind of in the Edgar Rice Burroughs, H.G. Wells, turn of the 19th to the 20th century science fictional kind of place, full of all kinds of weird racism and colonialism and all kinds of things. So very much a part, something that comes from that era or smacks of that era. And so Hurley Drummond, who is the hero, is leading Paul in an assault on the Sumbar, is the head of the whatever it is, I think. The Sumbar's priesthood, because they're going to sacrifice the woman that Paul recognizes, the bird woman that he keeps seeing in different settings. So that's where we are, and they have just crashed into the harem, I guess is what it is, more or less, or some kind of religious sanctuary. So there we go. And is there any bit of this? Okay, good. I'll just start here. So I'm going to go back over a couple of paragraphs from before. Brahman sprinted around the edge of the pool, pausing only to fling one of the masked priests into the water. The splash set the mists eddying, and for a split second, Paul could see clearly to the far side of the room. The winged woman was slumped on a bench, her chin on her chest, her thick, dark hair falling forward so that it almost hid her face. But it was her. Paul knew it beyond a doubt. Paul felt a thrill of horror to see her so seemingly lifeless. All this lunatic adventure had been to rescue her, but was he too late? He sprinted forward. Two hissing priests rose up before him out of the mist, waving long, thin daggers. He lifted the saljak horizontally before him and knocked them backward, stepping on one of them as he hurtled past. Brahman was on the other side of the pool, keeping three more robed assailants at bay with his saber. Paul ducked under a priest's dagger stroke, dealt a backhand blow that sent another sprawling to the tiles, then reached the stone bench in a few steps. He stretched out his hand and cupped the woman's face, lifting it. Her pale blue skin was warm, her eyes half open. She had been drugged in some way, but she was alive. He was seized by an intense joy, a feeling as foreign as it was powerful. He had found someone who meant something to him, who perhaps knew something of who he was, where he came from. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Jonas, what are you waiting for? Must I keep swapping chops with these greenskins all night?" Paul leaned forward to pick her up, but discovered that her hands were manacled to the bench. Brahman was still holding the trio of priests at the end of his sword, but several others had escaped and were running for the door, doubtless to alert the guard. Paul stretched the woman out on the bench, pulling her arms out straight above her head. aimed carefully, and brought the saljak down as hard as he could, sending links flying like popcorn. He lifted her, careful not to crush her fine wings, and threw her over his shoulder. "I've got her!" "Then leg it, man, leg it!" Paul staggered a little as he made his way back around the pool. She did not weigh much. In fact, she was surprisingly light. But he was running out of strength, and the saljak was heavy. After only a moment's consideration, he let it fall so he could wrap both arms around his precious burden. He and Drummond met on the far side of the pool and plunged through the doorway. They had gone only a few steps when another priest stepped into their path, this one robed in black. His golden mask was a featureless disk with eye holes. The priest raised his staff, and the air seemed to thicken. A moment later, a huge spider-like beast appeared before them, entirely blocking the corridor. Paul took a step backward in horror. "Run at it!" Drummond shouted. Paul looked at him with uncomprehending despair. "I said run at it! It ain't real!" When Paul still did not move, Drummond shook his head in frustration and lunged forward. The spider thing dropped down on him, appearing to enfold him in its clicking jaws. A moment later, it faded, like a shadow blasted by sunlight. Where it had crouched, Drummond stood over the supine form of the black-robed priest, whom he had just stunned with the pommel of his cavalry saber. "We'll never make it out the way we came in," Drummond shouted, "but I think there's a door to the roof somewhere." Overwhelmed, but determined to get the Venari woman to safety, Paul hobbled behind Drummond as the adventurer led them through twisting side passages of the temple precinct. Drummond plucked a torch from the wall, and within moments they had left the lighted main halls behind. Paul could not help but be impressed by the way Drummond found his way through the dark and confusing maze. The journey lasted only minutes, but seemed much longer. Paul was again caught up in the feeling that he was living through someone else's dream. Only the tangible warmth and weight of the woman on his shoulder kept him anchored in reality. At last, Drummond found the stairwell. Paul was staggering as they made their way out onto the roof to stand, as he had doubted they ever would again, free beneath the twin moons. "Of course, damn the luck, Bags is waiting over the gardens," Drummond said. "And unless I'm hearing things, the guard is going to be with us any moment." Paul could also hear the sounds of angry soldiers swarming up the stairwell. Drummond took his torch and flung it up in the air as hard as he could. It arced high and then fell, flame rippling behind it like the tail of a shooting star. "Just pray old Bags is keeping his eyes open. Now you best put her down and help me lean on this door." Paul gently set the winged woman on the rooftop. She murmured something but did not wake, then added his flagging strength to Drummond's. Already there were people shouting and pushing at the door. Once it was nearly forced open, but Paul and Drummond got their feet under them and slowly shoved it back. "Hurley!" the voice came from overhead. "Is that you, man?" "Bags!" shouted Drummond joyfully. "Good old Bags! Drop us the ladder. We're having a spot of bother down here." "It's there, in the middle of the roof." "Now, you go and hoist up your lady love quick as you can while I hold the door." Drummond spoke as calmly as if he were ordering port in the Aries Club. "Maybe Bags can give you a hand." Paul hurried back to the Venari woman and carried her to the ladder, then slowly began to make his way up, rung by painful rung, struggling to keep her swaying weight from overbalancing him. "I can't hold them much longer," Drummond called. "Bags, cast off." "Not without you, Hurley." "I'm coming, damn it. Just cast off." As Paul clung to the ladder, less than 24 feet above the rooftop, he felt the airship begin to rise. The bottom of the ladder lifted free. Drummond gave the door one last kick, then turned and sprinted toward the quickly rising ladder, even as the door burst open and Several angry Onyx guardsmen spilled out. The airship had pulled the ladder up so high that Paul felt his heart sink. They had doomed Brummond, who, madman though he might be, had risked his life for Paul's sake. But Hurley Brummond took two great bouncing steps and leaped higher than Paul could have believed possible, and caught the ladder's bottom rung in his hands. Grinning, he dangled at arm's length as the airship swept upward, and the Soombar's enraged guardsmen grew ever smaller below. "Well, old fellow," he called up to Paul, "that was an exciting evening, what?" The mysterious woman lay sleeping on the bed in the captain's cabin. Even folded, her diaphanous wings almost touched the walls. "Come along, Mr. Jonas." Professor Bagwalter patted him on the shoulder. "You could use some tending yourself. You've eaten nothing since you've been with us." Paul had sat by her for most of the night, reluctant to leave for fear she should wake up in a strange place and be frightened. But whatever drugs the priests had given her were powerful, and it seemed certain now that she would sleep until they reached the expedition camp. He followed Bagwalter to the airship's small kitchen, where the professor made him a meal of cold meat, cheese, and bread. He took it to be polite, although he did not feel hungry, then wandered up to the helm, where Brummond was relating their adventures to Galley for what was doubtless the third or fourth time. Still, it was a tale worth telling more than once, and Paul had to admit to himself that Brummond did not exaggerate his own deeds. "And how is your lady love?" Brummond interrupted the battle against the Vormargs to inquire. Upon being assured that she still slept, he was quickly at sword blows again. Paul moved down the deck, wanting quiet. He stood at the rail and moodily pushed the food around on his plate, watching the two moons, neither of them quite symmetrical, as they edged slowly across the sky above the speeding ship. "She's a lovely craft, isn't she?" asked the professor, joining him at the rail. "I'm glad we didn't damage her. Brummond may have been the one who borrowed her, but I would have wound up explaining things to the owner. That's the way it always works." He smiled. "Have you traveled with him a long time?" "Off and on for many years. He's a good egg, and if you want adventure, well, there's no one like Hurley Brummond." "I'm sure of that." Paul looked over the railing. The dark line of the great canal meandered back and forth beneath them, glinting here and there with the scattered lamps of settlements, and sometimes, when they passed over one of the larger cities, set a glimmer by an entire jewel box of sparkling lights. "That's Al Grashin down there," Bagwalter said as they flew over an immense expanse of dwellings. Even at their great altitude, it was taking a long time to cross. "The center of the Turtuk ivory trade. Brummond and I were kidnapped by bandits there once. Magnificent city, second only to Taktubim. Well, there's No Alva, too. They may have more people, but I've always found No Alva a little grim." Paul shook his head in bemused wonderment. People knew so many things. There were so many things to know. Yet despite the moment of recollection in the Soombar's palace, he knew almost nothing. He was alone. He had no home. He could not remember if he had ever had one. Paul closed his eyes. The stars in their teeming numbers across the black sky had seemed to mock his hopeless solitude. He gripped the railing hard in his frustration, and for a moment felt a temptation simply to tumble himself over the side, to resolve all his confusions in one dark plunge. But the woman, she'll tell me something. Her gaze, her dark, somber gaze, had seemed like a kind of refuge. "You appear to be troubled, old man," said Bagwalter. Startled, Paul opened his eyes to find the other man standing beside him. It, it's, it's only that I wish I could remember. Ah, the professor was again eyeing him in that disconcertingly shrewd way of his. Your head wound. Perhaps when we reach camp you will allow me to examine you. I have had some medical training and even some experience as an alienist. If you think that might help. Paul was not entirely comfortable with the idea, but he did not wish to be rude to someone who had given him so much assistance. In fact, there were some questions I was hoping to ask you. If you don't mind, that is. You see, I have been, well, I must confess, rather struck by your situation. I hope it does not seem rude, but you do not seem to belong here. Paul looked up, struck by an obscure but insistent sense of alarm. The professor seemed very intent. Belong here? I don't know that I belong anywhere. That's not what I mean. I express myself badly. Before Bagwalter could try again, a shining something streaked past their heads, then was followed quickly by three more. The things, which glowed with their own light, and seemed almost shapeless, pivoted in midair and flew alongside the airship, pacing the vessel at great speed. What are those? I don't know. Bagwalter polished his spectacles and replaced them, then squinted at the streaking smears of light, which rolled and tumbled along through the air like dolphins in the wake of a sea ship. They are no creature or phenomenon I have seen on Mars. Ho! Shouted Brumman from the helm. We are being taunted by some sort of otherworldly fireflies. Somebody fetch me my rifle. Oh dear, sighed Professor Bagwalter. You can see that science has a difficult time with Hurley around. The strange glowing objects followed the airship for almost an hour, then vanished as abruptly and inexplicably as they had arrived. By the time they had gone, Bagwalter appeared to have forgotten the questions he wished to ask. Paul was not displeased. Dawn was smoldering along the horizon as the ship at last began to descend. It had been a long time since they had passed the last large settlement, and Paul could see no sign of humanoid life whatsoever in this barren section of the Red Desert. Gally, who had been sleeping in Paul's lap, woke up and clambered to the rail. The airship banked, running parallel to a long wall of wind-carved hills. It slowed to ease through a pass, then began to sink at an even more deliberate pace. For the first time, Paul could make out details of the landscape, odd yellow trees with spiky branches and fluffy purplish plants like tall plumes of smoke. Look, Gally pointed. That must be the camp. A small circle of tents, perhaps half a dozen altogether, huddled at the bottom of the valley beside a dry gully. Tethered beside them was another airship, even larger than the one on which they flew. That's my Temperance, Brumman shouted from the helm. The finest ship on Olimar. A group of Nimbors digging in the center of the gully looked up at the airship's approach. One of them went running back toward the tents. Drummond brought the airship down beside the Temperance with expert smoothness, halting it just slightly more than a man's height from the ground, then letting it settle as softly as goose down. He vaulted from the captain's deck and over the railing, kicking up a puff of red dust, then dashed off toward the tents. Paul, Bagwalter, and Gally clambered down a little more slowly. The Nimbors had ceased their digging and now clustered around the new arrivals, tools still in their hands. Their glances were furtive and fleeting. Their mouths sagged open as though they could not get enough air to breathe. They were obviously curious, but it seemed a curiosity born of boredom rather than any real interest. Paul thought they looked much more bestial than Kluru and his fisher people neighbors. "And here they are!" Brumman's voice rang from the crimson stones. He had appeared from one of the larger tents, his arm around a tall, handsome woman in a crisp white blouse and long skirt. Even the sun helmet on her head seemed quite formal and stylish. "This is Joanna, my fiancée, and Baggs's daughter, of course. The only really clever thing he's ever done." "Welcome to our camp." Joanna smiled at Paul and shook his hand. Her eyes lit on Gally. "Oh, and this must be the Muppet. But you're not a child at all. But you're not a child at all. You're almost grown. What a pleasure it is to meet you, young master. I think I have some ginger snaps in my bread box, but we should make certain." Gally positively glowed as she turned back to Paul. "But first we must see to your fiancée, for I hear she has been terribly treated by the Sumbar's priests." Paul did not bother to argue over the word fiancée. If Joanna was anything like her intended, it would be useless. "Yes, I was hoping Hurley would help me carry her down." "Of course he will. Meanwhile, I will set out some morning tea on the porch. We call it a porch, but of course it is really only a sort of cloth roof beside the tent to keep off this scorching Martian sun." She smiled at him again, then took a step forward to kiss Professor Bagwalter on the cheek. "And I have not even said a word to you, father dear. How dreadful of me. I trust you haven't done yourself any injuries while you and Hurley have been off gallivanting." Joanna ran the camp with almost terrifying efficiency. Within a few minutes of their arrival, she had established the Vonari woman in a bed in one of the tents, made sure everyone had water and a place to wash, then introduced Paul and Gally to two other members of the expedition, a Taltor named Zaro, who seemed to be a cartographer, and a fat little human named Crumley, who was the foreman of the Nimbor work gang. She then led Gally off to the kitchen to help her prepare breakfast. His other responsibility removed, Paul returned to the winged woman's side. He sat on the tent floor beside her mattress and marveled afresh at the powerful effect her presence had on him. Her eyes fluttered. He felt an answering flutter inside his chest. A moment later, her lids slowly drew back. She stared at the ceiling for a long moment, expressionless. Then her face registered alarm, and she tried to sit up. "You're safe." Paul moved closer and laid his hand on her wrist, marveling at the cool silkiness of her azure flesh. "You've been rescued from the priests." She turned her huge eyes on him, wary as a caged animal. "You? I saw you on the island." Her voice struck the same resonant chord as did everything else about her. For a moment, Paul grew dizzy. "Yes," he said when he could find the breath. He found it hard to speak. "Yes, I saw you there. I know you, but something has happened to my memory. Who are you? Do you know me?" She stared at him for a long time without speaking. "I cannot say. Something about you." She shook her head, and for the first time the wariness faded, replaced by something more uncertain. "I am Vala, of 12 Rivers House. But how could I have seen you before that moment on the island? Have you been to Vonar, my home? For I never left that place until I was chosen to be the Sumbar's gift." "I don't know." "Damn it, I don't know anything." Paul slapped at his knee in frustration. The sudden sound caused Vala to flinch, her wings spread, rustling as they brushed against the tent walls. All I know is my name, Paul Jonas. I don't know where I've been or where I come from. I hoped you could tell me." She fixed him with her black eyes. "Paul Jonas. The name is strange to my ears, but I feel something when I hear you speak it." She furled her wings and slid back down into the bed. "But it hurts my head to think. I am tired." "Sleep, then." He reached out and took her cool hand in his. She did not resist. "I'll stay with you. You're safe now, in any case." She shook her head slowly, like a tired child. "No, I am not. But I cannot tell you why that is." She yawned. "How full of odd ideas we both are, Paul Jonas." The dark eyes closed. "Could it be?" she said, her speech beginning to stumble. "I think I remember a place with many leaves, with trees and plants. But it is like an old dream." Paul could see it too. His pulse quickened. "Yes? That is all. I do not know what it means. Perhaps it is a place I saw when I was a child. Perhaps we knew each other when we were children." Her breathing grew slower. Within moments, she was asleep again. Paul did not let go of her hand until Joanna came and dragged him to breakfast. He was on his way back to Vala's side, a mug of tea and a plate of buttered scones clutched precariously in his hands, when he was intercepted by Professor Bagwalter. "Ah, there you are. I was hoping to catch you alone. Didn't seem like breakfast table conversation, if you know what I mean." "What's that?" Bagwalter removed and nervously polished his spectacles. "I've been wanting to ask you a question. It's, I suppose it could be considered rather rude." Paul was very conscious of the hot Martian sun. Drops of sweat trickled down the back of his neck. "Go on," he said at last. "I was wondering." Bagwalter was obviously uncomfortable. "Oh, dash it, there's no polite way to say it. Are you a citizen?" Paul was taken by surprise. He did not know what he had been fearing, but it was not this. "I don't know what you mean." "A citizen. Are you a citizen or a puppet?" Bagwalter's voice was a harsh whisper, as though he were being forced to repeat an overheard obscenity. I don't know what I am. I don't know what those words mean." "Citizen of where?" The professor stared at him intently, then took out his pocket handkerchief and wiped his brow. "Perhaps it is not required to tell here. I must confess that I have never asked anyone before, or perhaps my English is not as good as I believed it was, and I have not made myself understood." He looked around. The Taltor, Zaro, was walking toward them, but was still far away. "I am privileged to be a guest of Mr. Jun Bao, a very important person, the most powerful man in the New China enterprise. Perhaps you have heard of him. He is a close friend and associate of Mr. Jongleur, whose creation this is, and so I have been permitted to come here." Paul shook his head. It was all gibberish, or almost all. The last name had a faint resonance, like an arcane word from a nursery rhyme, unheard since childhood. The professor, who had been watching him carefully, clucked his tongue in sad resignation. "I thought Because you did not seem to fit here. I meant no offense, but there are so few other citizens. One or two I have met in the Aries Club, but they are mostly out having adventures. Also, I feared that secretly they were laughing at my English. It is not surprising. Perhaps I was quite fluent once, but I have not used it since my university days at Norwich. Norwich. In any case, I hope to have someone real to talk to. I have been in this simulation for a month, and it is sometimes a little lonely. Paul took a step backward, baffled and more than a little frightened. The professor was spouting incomprehensibilities, but some of them seemed as though they should mean something to him. Professor! The cartographer had almost reached them. His jade-tinged skin was shiny with perspiration. He did not look as well suited to the climate as the Nimbor laborers. Gracious sir, forgive my interruption, but you are wanted for a conversation on the radiophonic device. Bagwalter turned, his impatience obvious. For God's sake, what is it? Who would be calling? It is the Telari embassy in Taktubim. The professor turned back to Paul. I'd better take this. Listen, old man, if I've said something offensive, it was unintentional. Please put the whole thing out of your mind. He tried to hold Paul's gaze, as if searching for something, his expression almost yearning. For a moment, Paul thought he could sense a very different face looking out from behind the mask of the phlegmatic Englishman. Troubled, Paul watched Bagwalter head back toward the main circle of tents. Vala was awake and sitting up in bed when he arrived, her wings partially unfurled. There was something both confusing and gloriously appropriate about the great feathered sweeps that extended on either side of her, but Paul was already full-fed with half-memories. As he told her the complete story of her rescue from the Sumbar's palace, he gave her the tea, which was finally cool enough to drink. She took it in both hands and lifted it to her mouth for a tentative sip. It's good, she smiled. Her look of pleasure made his insides ache. Strange, but I like it. Is it an Ulamari drink? I think so. He sat down on the tent floor, his back against the stiff canvas. There are a lot of things I don't remember, of course, so much that I don't know where to start thinking sometimes. She gave him a long, serious look. You should not have taken me from the priests, you know. They will be angry. In any case, they will only choose another daughter of Vonar for the sacrifice. I don't care. That may sound terrible, but it's true. I have nothing but you, Vala. Can you understand that? You are my only hope of finding out who I am, where I come from. But how can that be? Her wings lifted and extended, then folded behind her once more. Before I came here for festival season, I never left my world. And in all my life I have only met a few of you Telari. I would remember you, surely. But you said you remembered something. A leafy place, trees, a garden, something like that. And you said my name sounded familiar. She shrugged her slender shoulders. It is strange, I admit. Paul was becoming increasingly conscious of an odd, grinding sound coming from outside, but he was unwilling to be distracted. It's more than strange, and if I know anything in the world, it is that you and I have met before. He moved closer and took her hand in his. She resisted for only a moment, then allowed him to possess it. He felt as though he could draw strength from the mere contact. Listen, Professor Bagwalter, He's one of the people who helped rescue you. He asked me some very strange questions. I felt they should mean something to me, but they didn't. He called this place a simulation, for one thing." "A simulation? Did he mean an illusion like the trickery practiced by the Sumbar's priests?" "I don't know. And he mentioned names, lots of names. Jongleur was one of them. The other was something like June Bao." There was a rustle at the tent door. Paul turned to see Gally pulling the flap aside. The harsh whining noise was markedly louder. "Paul, come see! They're almost here, and it's a most wonderful machine." Paul was irritated, but it was hard to ignore the boy's excitement. He turned back to find that Vala had pushed herself against the tent wall, her black eyes wide. "What is it?" "That name." She lifted her long-fingered hands as though to keep something away. I do not like it." "Which name?" "Paul, come on!" Gally was pulling at his arm. The grinding was very loud now, and there was a deeper noise beneath it that he could feel through the very sand beneath the tent floor. It was almost impossible to ignore. "I'll be back in a moment," he told Vala, then allowed Gally to lead him out the door of the tent, where he stopped in astonishment. Waddling down the valley toward the camp was the strangest machine he had ever seen or could ever imagine seeing. A huge four-legged device, almost 100 feet long, that looked like nothing so much as a mechanical crocodile made of metal beams and polished wooden panels. The head was as narrow as the prow of a ship. The back, except for 3 giant smokestacks belching steam, was covered with striped tenting. Flywheels turned, pistons plunged up and down, and steam whistled from the vents as the thing slowly made its way down the slope. Paul could just dimly see several tiny figures standing in a recessed space on the top of the head. "Isn't it grand?" shouted Gally over the racket. Professor Bagwalter appeared around the corner of one of the tents and approached them. "Frightfully sorry about all this," he bellowed. "They just called on the radio phone. Apparently they're from the Talari embassy. Supposed to perform some kind of check on our arrangements before we leave for the back of beyond. Some little irritation devised by the Sumbar's mandarins, I have no doubt. Our embassy wallahs are always trying to stay on the Sumbar's good side, which usually means bad luck for the rest of us." "Do you think it has anything to do with rescuing Vala?" Paul shouted, watching in helpless fascination as the monstrous vehicle crawled to a halt a few dozen yards outside the camp, shuddering and piping like a tea kettle as its boilers were vented. A golden sun was painted on its side, surrounded by 4 rings, the inner 2 and outermost white, the third bright green. "Oh, I rather doubt that, old man. You saw how slow the thing is. They would have had to set out a couple of days ago." As the clamor of the device died down, Paul heard Vala's wings rustling behind him. He blindly reached out a hand. A moment later, he felt her fingers close around his. "What is it?" "Someone... What? Oh, sorry, that's her speaking. What is it?" "Someone from the embassy, but it might be a good idea if they didn't see you," he said. The great mechanical head had settled to within only a few feet of the ground. Now the side of it opened up, tumbling outward in an array of hinged plates that formed a stairway. A pair of figures moved out of the shade of the awning toward the steps. "I suppose I'd better make myself useful," said Bagwalter, starting toward the strange crocodile machine. Something about the men moving down the stairway struck Paul with a pang of unease. The first was thin and angular. Something glinted on his face as though he wore spectacles like the professor's. The second only now emerging from shadow, was so grotesquely fat that he seemed to be having a difficult time descending. Paul stared, his fear growing. There was something dreadful about this pair, something that radiated chill through his thoughts. Vala was moaning in his ear. As he turned toward her, she jerked her hand away and took a stumbling step back. Her eyes were so wide with horror that he could see white all the way around her dark pupils. No, she shivered as though with a fever. No, I will not let those two have me again. And I think we're going to stop there. So, thank you so much for joining me, as always. It was a great pleasure to share some time with you. Excuse me. And I don't know, for those of you who are in this relative time zone, tomorrow, it's possible we may have to go out and do something in the evening tomorrow. So I might not be able to do the broadcast, in which case, since it's an evening broadcast, I might do it the next day or something. Not sure. So those of you who might be interested in seeing tomorrow 7 p.m. or later today's 7 p.m. broadcast, check the Facebook page, and which is where most of this stuff winds up. Although I'll try and put it on all my social media pages. And other than that, again, a pleasure to spend time with you. I hope to see you next week, same time, 7 p.m. Sorry, not 7 p.m., 1 a.m. my time, Pacific Daylight Time, and whatever time it is now for you guys. And anything else I wanted to say? Not really. Just take good care of yourselves. Take good care of those around you, your loved ones, your family, your friends, your neighbors. Anybody you might happen to bump into looks like they might need some help. It's been tough times and still is tough times in a lot of ways. So do what you can. That's kind of everybody's job. If you want to live in a society, if you want to be part of the human herd, pack, whatever we are, we all need to help each other. And with that, I will say goodnight. Thank you. Peace. I'll see you real soon. Ciao.